Hi, I'm Derek Fildebrandt, publisher of the Western Standard. We're heading to a likely election to be called next week. And so you're going to see a lot more of me writing a lot more, interviewing a lot more people in and around this election campaign that is going to be very important for Canada and for the West. Our first guest is going to be, in just a few minutes, Conservative MP Michelle Rempel Garner, the MP for Calgary-Nose Hill. But before we get into her, I want to just talk a bit about the new Liberal leader and Prime Minister-designate Mark Carney. Switching out unpopular leaders to stave off election defeat is an old and sometimes successful Canadian political tradition. Here in Alberta, it worked like a charm in the old PC party until it didn't. The most famous example of it most definitely not working was Kim Campbell's last-minute tagging in for Brian Mulroney as PC leader in 1993. The party had hemorrhaged its support into two new parties, the Reform Party in the West and the Bloc Québécois in Quebec. But Campbell's substitution suddenly reinvigorated the PCs, putting them in contention with Jean Chrétien's Liberals. The quick blood transfusion in support in the polls quickly evaporated, though, as people remembered that they still hated the PCs. The rest is history. The PCs disintegrated and went from a majority government to just 2 seats, the worst defeat for a governing political party in the history of the world. Today's Liberals are attempting a similar leadership transfusion and have received a boost in polling support. How much support there is varies wildly depending on which poll you're looking at. You see, the polls are drunk right now. Eco's pollster Frank Graves believes the Liberals are about to win a historic supermajority of unprecedented levels in every region of Canada outside of Alberta, although his results strangely don't seem to include anything from Saskatchewan and Manitoba. Graves' credibility as a pollster leaves a lot to be desired, and he's almost certainly incorrect. Still, other polling firms have shown the Liberals are closing the gap or even matching the Conservatives. Ipsos research shows the Liberals at 38%, a statistical tie with the Conservatives at 36%. Abacus data, meanwhile, has the Liberals making a much more modest comeback to a distant second place at 28%, still far behind the Conservatives at 42%. So yeah, the polls are blotto. People are likely to believe whichever poll favors the party they support. But 2 things are clear. The first is that the Liberals have seen some increased support since Trudeau stepped aside so that the Liberals could anoint Mark Carney. However significant an increase that is, however, is impossible to tell. Depends which poll you like. Second, most of the Liberal gains have come at the expense of Jagmeet Singh's NDP. The NDP elected Singh as their leader, largely because they thought he had a hip tip-top vibe, like Trudeau. But having spent the last 6 years as a parliamentary appendage of the Liberal Party, the NDP is left with more of a Trudeau vibe around it than Mark Carney's Liberals. Well, life and politics just aren't fair. Mark Carney's appeal, as with the Liberal brand generally, resonates most strongly in Eastern and Central Canada, where there's a deep yearning for the Laurentian elitist. And Carney fits that bill, probably better than the dictionary definition. Highly educated, rich, polished, progressivist, internationalist, and intelligent. In many ways, Carney is like Justin Trudeau, but smart. Carney's also smartly thrown overboard 2 highly unpopular Liberal policies, the consumer half of the carbon tax and the increase in the capital gains tax. It was just a month ago that he was claiming that we would all die if we didn't have a carbon tax, but voters have a short memory, and politics isn't fair. And there may be just enough voters east of Winnipeg who want a Liberal government, but are just sick of Justin Trudeau's Backpfeifengesicht. That's German for punchable face. Maybe. Trump hasn't helped the Conservative case either. His chaotic on-again, off-again trade war has deeply unsettled Canadians, including many who are otherwise sympathetic to him. However much the Liberals have dragged the Canadian flag through the mud over the last 9 years, they appear to have successfully wrapped themselves in that flag and have caught some traction in labeling anyone who opposes them as traitors. Exhibit A, Albertans who are unwilling to sacrifice the oil industry as a pawn for the East. Poilievre is no Trump, but he is a right populist, and that may be enough to convict him in the eyes of swing voters who want to be protected from the bad orange man. The Liberals have given themselves a shot at survival here by switching out their leader. History has examples of both triumph and tears for what comes next. Will Canadians remember that they still hate the Liberals? Or will they fall in line? Time will tell. All right. Well, let's bring in our guest today. Michelle Rempel Garner is the Conservative MP for Calgary Nose Hill. Thank you very much for joining us, Michelle.
Thanks for having me.
All right. I mean, it's a pretty poorly kept secret. Some people that we both know who work in war rooms, in the Conservative war room, have been all recalled as of about 2 weeks ago, or even a bit more in some cases, to Ottawa to staff the war room. How likely is it that Canadians are going to see the writ drop and an election called next week?
Well, we've needed an election for a long time. So, just speaking on behalf of myself, I hope that the call comes sooner than later. The Liberals should have taken Canada to an election a long time ago. And as you were talking about the NDP ahead of time. The Liberals should have voted non-confidence in the Liberals, months and months ago as well. So, I can't purport to speak for the likes of Mark Carney and Justin Trudeau's inner circle, who have now taken up residence in his new office. But certainly we are on high alert for an election to happen.
Is it safe to say that within the Conservative caucus and party in Ottawa, you guys are expected? You're expecting an election to be called by next week?
Well, we've been preparing for an election for quite some time because we felt that it was necessary. You've seen Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre for months trigger confidence motion after confidence motion. So yeah, of course we're calling for an election and doing all the.
You're ready for one. You're calling for one, but let me put the question in another way to pin you down. Scale of 1 to 10. What's if you're putting money down, just personally, no insider information, just if what's the chances of an election on a scale of 1 to 10 being called next week?
I wish I could give you that answer, and I'll tell you why it's difficult not to be able, or it's hard to be able to do that. You had the NDP last fall at a time where the Liberals were basically at historic low, and the NDP propped them up. So it's hard to get into the minds of these left-wing politicians. They're going to do whatever is best for them, not what's best for the Canadian who's struggling with rent or to buy groceries. So certainly it's our position as a party that we don't have confidence in the Liberal government, no matter who's in charge, because it's largely the same team, right? So I'm certainly hoping that there's one coming soon, that we're going to get one soon. But Derek, who knows what these Liberals will do?
Okay. The Conservative Party has had record fundraising for several years now. You guys, I won't go on too long because I know you want to raise some more money, but you guys have a war chest ready to fight, I think, a couple of campaigns here at this point. I'm not sure I don't think all of the Conservative candidates are selected, but most. There's a few nomination races, I think, outstanding, which I'm kind of surprised have not been wrapped up yet, but okay. But how prepared is the Conservative Party for an election if it were to be called next week?
Well, I always start the answer to that question with, do we have a message and a plan that's going to resonate with Canadian voters, right? That really is where election preparedness starts from. And you've seen Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre start to roll out major policies that have been in that platform, like removing the GST on new home builds to address the housing crisis. He's been out over the last couple of weeks talking about our Canada First plan to secure the Canadian border, to shore up the Canadian economy after 10 years of Liberal ruination, which has left the Canadian economy very vulnerable to American tariffs. So, I could spend the entire show talking about that. But on point number one, I'm really excited to see the policies that we've been rolling out that make a lot of sense and that I think we've seen have resonated with Canadian voters and will continue to do so. And then, we have seen, like you ask about some of the other preparedness things like fundraising, like candidates. I think it's because we started that with that foundation of a solid plan that resonates with a lot of the issues that have been facing Canadian voters, that we've seen a lot of interest in folks wanting to run for us, that we've had a lot of folks reach out to us with financial support because they understand that change has to happen. The Liberals are asking for a fourth term. They've had 10 years in government. They've doubled the debt. They put us into an inflationary crisis. I could go through all of the problems, but people understand that when the Liberals are asking for a fourth term, it's going to make life a lot harder on them. So I think that some of the other metrics that you talked about there, they're a result of us having a strong plan and people saying, yeah, we want change. Let's work together on that. So again, it's time for an election.
So, you talked about having the message ready. And that's where I want to go with this because, 6 months ago, everything was cost of living. It was inflation, carbon tax. Carney has said he's scrapping the carbon tax. That's only half true. He's said, half true at best, I should say. Yeah, he said he'll scrap the consumer-facing carbon tax, which still leaves in place the industrial carbon tax, which also hugely drives up cost of living, makes our economy less competitive. Although I don't, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I'd like to be corrected. I have not heard Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre commit that he'll get rid of the industrial carbon tax as well, only the consumer carbon tax. But at least he said he'll just get rid of it and it's just done. Whereas Carney has talked about some very weird, convoluted replacements for it. So we'll get a new carbon tax probably in place of it. But at least as it's being reported in the legacy media, it's gone. He's getting rid of the consumer carbon tax. He's getting rid of the capital gains tax. So two of the big arrows in the Conservative quiver. But 6 months ago it was cost of living and inflation. Today, it's wall-to-wall coverage, and I think reasonably so, of the on-again, off-again trade war with Donald Trump. Canada's probably wrong on a few files, but it seems to be he's been rather irascible and irrational in how he's dealing with this, and I think this has scared a lot of people. So I think, I want to know, how is the Conservative Party adapting itself to the shift in narrative away from cost of living, which is not going to go away as an issue, but I think it's being eclipsed as the dominant issue. How is the Conservative Party adapting its platform and its messaging from cost of living, carbon tax issues towards trade war, 51st state annexation rhetoric from Trump? And is that kind of thing from the states?
There's so much to unpack there, and I want to get into the carbon tax, but you kind of made an assertion that cost of living isn't top of mind right now. I guess I'll ask you a question. Do you think that your viewers would think that rent magically got cheaper in the last 2 months?
No, but I think it's fair to say it's gone from the overwhelming dominant issue to at least roughly equal with the issue of the trade war.
Would you say that your listeners would think that groceries have gotten magically more affordable in the last 2 months?
None of these things have gotten better, but in terms of what's top of mind in voters' minds,
what about crime?
In a lot of the polling out there, the trade war has become a massive issue. So obviously, what voters are talking about has changed.
What about crime? Has downtown Calgary LRT gotten magically safer in the last 2 months?
No, I park in the alley here.
It's a disaster. The point I'm trying to make is, I have been doing this job a hot minute, and I know when certain legacy media outlets try to tell me something is the most top of mind issue for Canadians. I'm not saying that tariffs aren't. They're a problem. But what is top of mind for Canadians is the fact that rent has not magically gotten cheaper in the last 2 months, that the streets have not gotten safer, and that people still can't afford to eat. So for me, when I look at the tariff issue, the reality is that Canada has been left vulnerable. Canadians have been left in a position where they can barely afford to make ends meet. They're in experiencing extremely unsafe situations in virtually every part of the country because of Liberal crime policy. So the tariffs, what they've done is exacerbated the impact of 10 years of disastrous Liberal policies. And, of course the Liberals, Derek, want people to forget that it was them that caused these problems, that it was them that left Canada vulnerable, and then somehow believe that they, just by changing the figurehead on Justin Trudeau's team, like the hood ornament on Justin Trudeau's team, that's all that they've done, that somehow those issues will magically go away. And I think it's actually really irresponsible for people who are considering running in a federal election to assert somehow that rent has gotten cheaper, that crime has gotten better, and that groceries are more affordable. So we have to simultaneously address those problems. The Liberals don't want to, because it doesn't help their electoral prospects, right? They want people to forget where these things came from. So that's why, you've seen conservative leader Pierre Poilievre come out and say, no, Canadian voter, Canadian citizen, I understand where you're at. I understand that the immigration system is broken, that the Liberals broke it. I understand that the Liberals' catch and release policies have made crime unsafe, that their drug policies have created an even worse opioid crisis, right? And propose solutions for those issues too. The Liberals, now with Mark Carney, you've got this guy who I don't think he's ever knocked a door in his life, right? And he's being told by Justin Trudeau's advisors where they think they need to lead the mainstream media to fool Canadians into voting them for another term. And we're just not going to go there, because it's not, that's not a productive path to correct the damage that the Liberals have inflicted on the country. Now, again, of course, tariffs are a huge problem. That's why you've had Pierre Poilievre out talking about our Canada First plan to address those issues and strengthen the economy. And then just very briefly on the carbon tax. I mean, Derek, Mark Carney was the archpriest of net zero up until literally 5 minutes ago. So pardon me if I don't believe that he's changed his stripes magically overnight. And, the proof's in the pudding. Even since he announced his leadership bid, he went on Atlantic television, mocked the steel industry, said, well, how much steel does anyone use? Proposed a new tax on the steel industry in the middle of the tariff crisis, right, related to carbon pricing. And pardon me for not believing that a Liberal who is the archpriest of net zero policy is going to somehow change his stripes overnight. And that's why I think, we have such a compelling narrative to the Canadian voter, that we take these issues very seriously, but we also have a serious plan and a track record of authenticity on managing on these issues. And that's, I think, the contrast that you're going to see in the upcoming election campaign.
It's not just a shift around the set of issues before voters right now, but it's also the personalities, and personalities play, I think, a huge role in how, people don't vote for a prime minister. Technically, they vote for a member of parliament. But, in many ways, we all know it's kind of acts as a proxy electoral college almost in Canada. A lot's going to depend on who people want to be the prime minister, the personality in the big chair. The Conservatives had done a very good job in holding up a mirror to Justin Trudeau, and Canadians were obviously done with him. That led to bad numbers that eventually led to his caucus very, very belatedly getting rid of him when it was far too late to actually do it in a way that'd be any good for the country. But perhaps it'll be good for the Liberal Party. But as I said in my opening remarks, Justin Trudeau and Mark Carney are very, very similar on the policy front. But I think it's fair to say, at least for now, Mark Carney's less annoying. He doesn't have that Backpfeifengesicht, a punchable face. Maybe you think he does, but I think he's just not viscerally dislikable to look at and to listen to. What's the Conservative Party doing or how is it adapting to having to shift from Justin Trudeau being its main target to Mark Carney?
Well, I mean, it behooves me to say I don't advocate for physical violence against any politician. Got to start with that.
For anyone without a sense of humor, I suppose you have to say that. Yeah.
But in all seriousness, Carney has really built his own narrative around his interchangeability with Justin Trudeau by virtue of his senior role with the Liberal Party over the last several years, right? I mean, just even dating back to the pandemic, he was, I think his title is, I'd have to look, but something like the Build Back Better advisor. So he was part of the senior advisory team that really built a lot of the inflationary spending that Justin Trudeau put in place, right? He's Chrystia Freeland's son's godfather. He was named a senior economic advisor, and he's been the global architect of a lot of the policies that the Liberals implemented, particularly around net zero and the disastrous consumer carbon tax. So there is a big record to litigate on Mr. Carney. But the reason why I think a lot of people are just starting to become familiar with him is because the Liberals probed Parliament for a reason, right? They shuttered Parliament to prevent people like me raising some of these issues in forums like Parliamentary Committee or in the House of Commons, where Canadians typically see clips of these things in the House of Commons. They shut us off for a reason, right? Because they don't want Mark Carney to be vetted. And in fact, a lot of the Canadian mainstream media has not vetted Mr. Carney since he announced his leadership bid. He's only taken a handful of questions, and he's only gone on, American softball, like late night shows. So I think that under the glare of an election campaign, when Canadians are getting coverage of all of the leaders at the same time and really starting to weigh their choices, particularly for casual observers who might not think about politics on a day-to-day basis, Mr. Carney's track record is going to be litigated. It will be. The other thing that I'll say is that when you watch Mr. Carney, when in his few handful of public appearances over the last couple of months, the minute that he's not reading a teleprompter, his true self comes out, right? So, for example, I look to his very flaccid speech that he gave after winning the leadership race on Sunday night. The one time he went off the teleprompter, he openly mocked derisively the request that he disclose his sizable financial assets to the Canadian public in order to understand what his conflicts of interest were. And then again, I'll reference that the disastrous interview he gave with CTV Atlantic, where he mocked putting an additional carbon tax on steel producers during a time of, American tariff threat. So I think that you're probably going to see more of his inexperience and frankly out of touchness with the Canadian public. Somebody who has knocked doors and who has their finger on the pulse of the average person who can't afford to buy groceries or pay their rent wouldn't be so dismissive of these types of concerns or wouldn't give off such elitist vibes. So I think there's going to be a lot of vetting to be done of Mr. Carney over the next few months. I'm sure that the mainstream media, I'm sure that the CBC doesn't want to do that. That's why outlets like yours are important to give alternative viewpoints as opposed to a narrative that might just be, sort of pumping his tires.
Well, I just want to point out that Mark Carney has refused on multiple occasions to allow Western Standard reporters into his events, right, including reporters who are accredited with the various press galleries across the country here. He has allowed exclusively only regime subsidized media into his events. He's clearly uncomfortable. He didn't even have to let my reporters ask questions. He just wouldn't even let them in the door to take a picture and stand in line to not get a question. That's
ridiculous. And I think it was the Canadian Association of Journalists actually came out and supported you, right? And pointed this out, that it was insane. So again, just underscoring that he's not making himself available to the public for a reason. And it's because he doesn't want his record litigated. He wants people to forget that he was the architect of many of the policies that led Canada to this place. And, just hope that people will forget. But I don't think Canadians are that dumb.
Well, the last section I want to go to here, I want to talk about the party that no one's really talking about anymore. That's the NDP. The NDP have got, as I said in my opening remarks, at least I think in public perception, not in reality, but in public perception, the NDP are carrying more of Justin Trudeau's stench around them than the Liberals right now. The Liberals have got a new leader, but Jagmeet Singh has been tied at the hip to Justin Trudeau in policy, so both substance and perception for at least 6 years now, depending on how we're defining this, but conservatively 6 years. And, the polls are drunk. It's impossible to tell who's right out there and who's wrong. But there's been at least some uptick in Liberal support, which is very common when you switch out the leader. But in all of those polls, most of that new support for the Liberals is coming at the expense of the NDP. Not maybe life isn't fair, guys, but it's come at the expense of the NDP. But traditionally, a strong NDP has been helpful to a conservative campaign when you have kind of the hard left vote split between two parties. How come the Conservatives, maybe I'm not watching closely enough, but it seems to me that the Conservatives aren't talking about Jagmeet Singh anymore. They're done with him. He's kind of thrown in his lot with the Liberals, and he'll keep him. I actually think because of the polling support, Jagmeet Singh would vote to keep Carney in power through the spring if Carney wanted it. indications are that Carney's just going to, I think indications are Carney wants to take this bump in support, however big or not it is, and just roll the dice now. So I think the one who doesn't want an election the most is actually Jagmeet Singh. But how come the Conservatives, at least to me, in appearance, don't seem to be talking about the NDP and Jagmeet Singh anymore?
Well, Derek, I often think that people think that there's this magical 5-dimensional chess that happens with regard to, political positioning ahead of a campaign. And it's actually, and this, you have to have your own plan and focus on your own political strategy. And that's why, you've seen Pierre Poilievre focus very much on the crisis issues that the countries are facing right now. So you talked about tariffs earlier. Mr. Poilievre has been out talking about our Canada First plan, border security measures, economic, bolstering the economy measures, all very tangible things. He's been out there trying to reassure Canadians that there is an adult in the room and it's him. And that's showing. He's getting a lot of really good feedback from that. I hate to try to, you're kind of asking me an impossible task, which is to get into Jagmeet Singh's head and understand what he's doing. This is not a party that has, been the smartest on the political tactic side, but I will, I can't believe I'm saying this, give them one sort of positive kudo. And that's in the last week, they've decided finally to start litigating the Liberals, which they should have been doing the whole time, given that their role as an opposition party. But they've been litigating the Liberals on the issue of Brookfield had a lot of, this is Mark Carney's, the former it's a multi-billion-dollar everything corporation that he chaired up until just a few weeks ago. And they've been raising questions about some of their accounting practices and taxation practices and what role Mark Carney had in that. And when I saw that, I was like, yes, you're doing your job. Hello, good. So, I can't purport to speak on behalf of the NDP, but they need to figure out that their job is an opposition party and that the governing Liberals that they propped up for so long has a lot to be held to account for. And so, Godspeed to them on those issues.
Learning that they should act like an opposition party a week out from a potential election. Better late than never, boys. Okay. Michelle Rempel Garner, you've been very generous with your time. Despite your answers, I think you're about to leave and go to a secret campaign office and start putting together signs. I think I'm going to suspect. I'm just guessing that's probably what you're doing from here. Thank you very much.
Calgary Nose Hill Conservative Association does have a campaign office set up.
Oh, well, there we go. Oh, okay. Yes. I think that's more illuminating than anything you can say.
Yes.
All right. Well, Michelle, thank you very much for joining us today, and Godspeed on the campaign trail.
Thanks so much.
All right. Just before I wrap up, I want to thank our sponsor. This show has been sponsored by New World Precious Metals, based right here in Alberta. Years of inflationary money printing and rising debt have decimated the average Canadian savings. Gold and silver are the only currencies that have held their value for thousands of years. Last year saw 30% gains. New World Precious Metals offers unique platforms to help protect and grow your hard-earned wealth with gold and silver. Check them out at newworldpm.com. Thank you all for being here. Remember, the Western Standard is non-regime media. We are one of the only media left in all of Canada that refuses to take the Justin Trudeau, I guess now Mark Carney, federal taxpayer bailout of the media. We are supported by a few advertisers and by listeners and viewers and readers like you. Go to westernstandard.news right now. Click on subscribe. It's only $10 a month or $100 a year to get unlimited access past that pesky paywall and see all of our content every day. Thank you very much for joining us today. God bless.
What does success mean to you? Peace of mind? Financial freedom? Generational wealth? What do you see in your future? Investing in gold and silver can help you get there. Through our trading partners, New World Precious Metals offers safe, affordable, secure international accounts to help you meet your unique financial goals. Connect with one of our experienced team members. Invest in gold and silver today.